Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's a glorious day outside, so we're happy that you're here. My name is Kathleen Gielan. I am a program manager at McMaster University, and one of my programs that's under my portfolio is the Applied Clinical Research Program. Today we have Fanleo Burma here. She's one of our instructors to talk to us about mapping your path and taking control of your clinical research career. So we are going to bring Fanleo in a moment. But first, I just wanted to do the land acknowledgement. McMaster University recognizes and acknowledges that we are located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. To tell you a little bit more about Fanleo, she is a project leader in clinical operations with over 14 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry and in academia. She has a BSc in biochemistry and a Master's of Science in biotechnology. She's a member of the Association of the Clinical Research Professionals as a certified professional and certified Scrum Master. Her personal core values are being passionate, courageous, and strategic. And I'm also going to say giving because she's here with us today. Thank you, Fanleo, for leading the session today. And I will now pass it over to you. I'm going to be the driver of the slides. So if you need me to switch, you just let me know.
Okay, can we have the agenda, please? Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen, for that lovely introduction. And I want to say thank you to everyone for using your lunch time, if you're on the EST side of things, to listen to this. I want to say you wouldn't regret your time. We've got a packed agenda today. We want to say, why clinical research? I mean, there's so many careers in the world right now. Why would you choose clinical research to be the path that you would follow? And then we're going to talk about visualizing career pathways. I've got this fancy map that I got from ACRP, and it's going to talk about, different pathways you can consider in clinical research. You may not be the principal investigator or the doctor that actually does the research, but what are the pathways? What other areas are applicable in clinical research? And then what skills do I actually require to be part of this fancy roles? What skill do I require to be part of this industry? And of course, I'm going to be coaching you on knowing your strength and what could facilitate your career entry. Okay, so why clinical research? And some of you here, you're studying to be part of a clinical research career or program. Some of you are medical doctors. Some of you are in the healthcare space. And a lot of people have different reasons why they want to be part of, this clinical research industry. But I want to say that COVID really put us in the spotlight. I know a lot of people who never knew what I was doing before until we started hearing about the COVID vaccines. But most importantly, it's really trying to ensure that there's safety in our drug process. That's the height of it. Patient safety is really what clinical research is about. And it's a dynamic and growing field. It has diverse opportunities. There's the rise of, different parts. There's a project management aspect, there's the data aspects, there's the regulatory, which is like the core aspect, there's the site aspect where you're actually managing to ensure that all the site complies with regulation set. There's the whole myriad of things, and it's such a growing field. It's so much growing that we're trying to extrapolate that in about 20 years, almost everybody who is within the hospital environment will be involved in clinical research, because it helps us know our bodies properly. It helps us know what the effect of anything we put in our body is going to be. So it's such a great would I say industry to be part of. And then, some of us entered unintentionally. For example, I never knew there was anything called clinical research. I wanted to be involved in malaria trials back in West Africa when we started the malaria trials with GlaxoSmithKline. And I did go for an interview, but they said, hey, we finished all the laboratory work because I was a biotechnologist, right? We finished all the laboratory work, but we now need to test it in humans. And that was how I for the first time I heard of good clinical practice, which is GCP, and then I started the whole journey of experiencing and unraveling the industry. So a lot of people enter unintentionally, and it's really because you hardly find courses in university right now that say you have a BSc in clinical research. There are not courses now that have masters, but initially you didn't have like defined roles like that. And even when you're coming into clinical research or clinical trials, a lot of requirements say that you should have experience or exposure, but they never say you need a BSc in clinical research or a master's in clinical research. So you find that half of the people that work in the industry, if not, would I say 4/5, actually stumbled upon it. My first boss was a psychologist. I've worked with engineers that are in clinical research. Like it's an industry that has many wide parts that you can really plug into. And one of the things you need to know is you need to understand the major players in clinical research. You need to understand the sponsors who like the pharmaceutical and the biotech companies. I would stop calling them sponsors. I would be more, I'll call them more of those that actually have the devices or the drugs or vaccines, those that actually build them. So I would call them more of like the innovators in our industries. And then you have like the CROs, who are the companies that actually manage and help the innovators bring their drugs or their vaccines or their medical devices into the sites or into the world. They help them manage the process of actually doing the clinical trials. And then you have the sites. The sites are the hospitals. They're actually the hospitals where you have the clinical trials conducted. Or a site is usually defined when there's the presence of a principal investigator, which is the medical doctor that is in charge of the trial. Once there's a primary care physician attached to the trial, even if the site is remote or like, the patient is not actually physically going into the clinic, it's called a site because of the presence of a primary care physician that is in charge of the trial. And then you have regulatory bodies that are also like the foundation. You have like the Health Canada, you have FDA. These people, you have like those who come together that develop things like good clinical practice, GCP. These people are also part of clinical research. So there's a wide range of things you can do in clinical research. This is where we're really going to spend a whole lot of time today. And I don't know how many of you have visited the UK. This reminds me of the underground map, and it's it's so lovely to see this again. First of all, the first thing we're going to look at is the key, which is right below to the right, below down. And it has red for regulatory, the blue ones for the CRO industry, the purple ones for the clinical research side, the green ones for data management, the the yellow ones for project management, orange for compliance, and the gray ones for sponsored programs. I'm gonna just give you a deep dive into what this map is and how it can be very useful for you. After this map, I'll tell you about coming into research, but I just want to first of all talk about the different roles. A lot of people, when they first hear about clinical research, the first thing they talk about is they want to be a monitor or a CRA. CRAs, that's what a lot of people who have mentored and who have come to me have asked that they want to be. But there's so much more about being in clinical trials, like I've said earlier on. The first part we're going to talk about is the regulatory. So if you go to the right of the regulatory the right of the main hub, well, I would say King's Cross. If you go to the right, you see you can be a QA specialist, you can be a regulatory manager, training coordinator. And then if you go to the left, you see that you can be an IRB director, you can be an IRB analyst, lead regulatory affairs, regulatory coordinator, and then you can do senior regulatory coordinator. So first of all, most of the documents we receive in clinical trials, for them to get approval, they need to comply with, there's usually like a dossier list or a list to ensure that we have all this documentation that backs up the trial. Included in the dossier is usually the qualification of the staff that is conducting the trial. Included in the dossier is also like the protocol. We have like any safety report that has happened during the trial. You have people who come together and actually ensure that, first of all, we have this backup dossier list, what is going to be in here, and ensuring that all this list is going through. Any major decision that was made by the trial organization team during the trial, it could also be part of this dossier. There are different dossiers at different points. So it's really, the regulatory team really help us to keep this in track. Also, they're in charge of audits. They're in charge because sometimes we have like site audits just to ensure that the sites are actually in compliance with, what we said in the protocol, what we said we were going to do. Just for background, the protocol, it tells you this is all we're going to do for the trial. And you have major audits that could happen. You could have Health Canada come audit your site. So the QA aspect is more to ensure and the background, like I said, is more about the safety of the patient. And of course, also the way we're reporting the data, we want to ensure that that is compliant to, our standards, FDA standards, Health Canada standards. And then there's the CRO industry, which is the blue line. And you have the one that goes to the west. You have the clinical trial manager, the clinical project manager. You have the CRA, senior CRA, the CRA as the CRA, which is clinical research associate, and the clinical trial assistant. So you have, this is usually the part a lot of people hear about, and the part off, and they talk about how they're going to travel to different sites. It's not only about traveling. You are like a compliance manager for the trial. You're ensuring that the trial is the site is following the good clinical practice and all the company requirements of the drug that we are testing or the vaccine. And the CTA is more of the administrative part. The CRA or the senior CRA actually goes into sites to ensure that this is, being done per protocol or per GCP. Now you have the clinical project manager who is in charge of all the logistics aspects. So a lot of people forget that when we talk about clinical trials, we're not just talking about the drugs to the patient. We also have to think about the logistics of how do we get all the supplies to the patient at the right time and make sure that we do not get too many of the drug supply before we really, really need them. We have to think about storage if you're dealing with vaccines. Even if you're dealing with just drugs, making sure that the temperature of the drug storage area is in place. While the CRA does a whole lot of that, the clinical project manager does more of the logistics, the vendor management. You are not very involved. Now you're required to have like the background, the science foundation, but you would realize soon enough, I've worked in the clinical project management role, that you're not dealing with as much of the science as you were probably as a CRA when you're actually interacting with the supervisor. You're more like an operations manager. You're thinking of resource. Your CRA didn't show up in the site. you need to refill that resource. So there's more in terms of planning and project management, which is why the healthcare industry has adopted, and the clinical research industry has adopted Scrum Masters, has adopted, agile methods, just trying to see how, we can get better organized when it comes to our clinical trials. I'll take the clinical research site, the purple one, which starts with the principal investigator. The principal investigator really is someone who is trained to be part of a clinical trial, to lead a clinical trial. The principal investigator, not only does he talk to the patient or attend to the patient, he also must be sure that he's not influencing the patient unduly to be part of the trial, or unduly in terms of reporting whatever data that happens during the trial. He is the primary safety contact for the patient if there's any emergency. As the primary care physician, you refer to the principal investigator. And since you have different therapeutic areas of clinical trials or clinical research of medicine, you have different principal investigators, some in orthopedics, immunology, endocrinology. So you have people that have decided to, medical doctors who are consultants who have decided they want to be part of this, and they've gone to, learn more about clinical practice, good clinical practice, and more about clinical research. And then we've adopted them to be part of our studies. You have like the site director, who is like more about managing the sites. So it gives like an operational feel to it. Then you could have the nurse or the clinical research nurse. I'm going to go a bit to the west now. You see the senior CRC, the clinical research coordinator, we call it, the research assistant, the lab pharmacy technician. Now, whilst these people exist in terms of on a normal day in a hospital, particularly the clinical research coordinators are well trained for clinical trials, because they are the ones that you relate a whole lot more with the innovators of the trial. Their role is so critical to the trial, because they give they mediate between the busy principal investigator and the innovators or the sponsor. I feel like their role, and they're usually the first person the patient would see if they have to come in. So the number of skills they have, they're usually the most grounded specialist in clinical trials. From my decades of experience in clinical trials, the best people you can talk with that really understand what's going on in the trial is the clinical research coordinator, hands down, especially because they have the site perspective. I mean, from the sponsor's perspective, you could have and I will go into the medical science liaison and those who actually write the protocol, but the coordinators will tell you from a patient view, from a site view, as well as understanding the protocol. So they are very well grounded, I would say. So data management. Now, data management, after we get one of the things that we need to have when we are doing the trials, and some of you probably have like leaflets from tablets that you're taking, or say, for the vaccine, direction of use and things like that, adverse events that has happened. And one of the way we come up with those leaflets or the inserts is out of research that has been done. And these are excerpts from data that have been collected during the trial. It is so important that the data is not biased, meaning it's not trying to favor unduly any condition or any trying to push the drug out, for example, without the right safety profile. So the data coordinator, or the green line in essence, is the data house. First of all, if you start with the biostatistician or the research scientist, they actually design what data points are we going to collect? What sample size are we going to use for this study that would ensure that we would actually get sufficient data for this study? Would you require just one person to test the drug and we'll be like, okay, it's fine? Would we require to test the drug in this and this population to ensure that we actually have enough safety data for this trial? So the biostatistician and the research scientists come in the design aspect. Now, in terms of the data management, now the manager designs the systems on which we're collecting the data. And that actually goes a lot into a world that is really still being tapped in clinical research. So you have places, you have systems like Viva systems that a lot of people, a lot of companies use to actually collect this data. You have some companies actually design their data collection systems from scratch during the trial for whatever reasons. So the data manager actually, intercepts that and ensures that is done properly. And then you go down southwest, and you have like the data analyst, data coordinator, the system specialist, and it gets a bit techier, right there. So this also shows to me that people who are in IT can have some input and transition to clinical research. A lot of times it's just understanding the basics of good clinical practice, which is patient safety, patient protection, because now you're thinking about protecting the privacy of the patient. That is like, those are like whole background things to be able to go into clinical research. Okay, so I think we're almost halfway in. Now we're back to project management. I know initially we talked about the clinical trial assistant, the blue line, and I didn't go south to the blue line where we have the clinical team manager, management. Different companies have different titles. But now we want to talk about the project manager and the lead project manager role. And then if we go southwest, we have project coordinator and senior project coordinator. Now, whilst there's a bit of a difference with the trial management role, the yellow line is actually not very much involved in relating with like the CRA or the sites. That's like the difference between the two of them. This one usually would manage on like a global scale. They would manage a lot more about the operations, just like the other ones, just like the blue line. However, the blue line is interfacing a lot with the sites and interfacing a lot with the CRAs, the monitors that go to the site. Now, the yellow line doesn't have a lot to do with the sites at all. So if you're like a core project manager, you're really trying to, break into clinical trials, you can start from like the project coordinator role. You can also go to the program coordination. But one of the things I always say, to be a good project manager in clinical trials, the honest truth, you should be on the blue track, the blue pathway, which is the clinical trial assistance, or you could have come from the site for you to have that edge or influence. However, if you're like, super organized and you can really turn around things in terms of project management, and you are actually very quick to learn, you can try to delve in straight into the yellow line. Second to the last, the compliance, that's the orange line. So just as much as I said, and I said it earlier on, that some of the dossiers you require that there is training for the principal investigator, you want to see the CV and all that. The compliance ensures that we are properly trained. We have the lives of patients in our hands, so to say. So it's really critical that those who are participating in this trial are really well qualified for this role. Last but not the least, I will talk about sponsored programs, and you talk about grant specialists, feasibility coordinators, contract specialists. There's a bit of similarity to the red one when I talked about the IRB analysts and those who are in quality. However, for the gray line, which has to do with contracts, you notice that there's a lot of relationship between the site and then the CRO or the sponsors, and the contract specialists actually ensure that this happen properly. There's ensure that it's fair, ensure that it's not, I mean, you're not overpaying the hospital, and you're also not overpaying the investigator to an extent of influencing decision making. So you have those involved in like offering grants and all that. They ensure that the budget and all is coordinated together. Okay, so we've heard a lot about, you know, the number of roles, and there's still some that I probably don't see on that map. But I just want to say that I find out that communication is like a very strong soft skill that we need in clinical research. First of all, clear communication, ensuring that you also, and it even starts right before you have the patients in. Right now, I'm just reviewing, an adverts of a clinical trial. And one of the things I'm reviewing based on Health Canada standard is this communication trying to unduly influence patients to be part of this trial? That's, those are questions already. So communication is so important. What we say, what we write, how we say it, and having that problem solving attitude, you're going to come across a lot of situations where it feels impossible. How are we going to ensure, this happens? And that is what we need. We need more problem solvers. We need those who are very organized and have good time management skills. As you see, trials are going to advance in different ways. They're going to be, like I said, probably in the next 20 years, we're going to be having everybody involved in trials, anybody that goes into the hospital. So people who can think out of the box to imagine this, problem solve, organize, and ensure that, there's no waste of time for like the patient or even between all these processes. Some of the times when we design trials, we could design them out of the imagination that we want maybe a whole lot of data. So for example, the biostatistician, if you remember my last slide, thinking about the different data points, he may decide that we should actually, he may decide with the help of a medical science liaison or a medical writer, and the principal writer of the protocol, that you probably need a lot of blood samples taken at those points. Now, you could decide to make the lives of the patient easier by finding better time points to take it that will still give you the data you need. So in terms of organizing and finding ways to time management, it's still very crucial for the industry. And then I mentioned good clinical practice in everywhere, regulatory understanding, data management, and documentation. Very key things for the role. So now up to you. Next slide, please. Your transferable skills matter. I feel that we really open the doors for clinical trials or clinical research are really open to have more people come in and, excuse me, you can build on what you have. What are you naturally good at? How can you align your strengths with a clinical research pathway? And you can go back, the slides are going to be sent to you, and this is recorded, and you can have a good look at the map and see that what are you naturally good at, and how would my personal strengths be able to align in clinical research. And you may have like amazing attention to details. I talked about great communication skills, leadership, empathy, critical thinking. The first thing to really start out in your career is to actually assess yourself. A self-assessment is like a keyword being preached right now, but it's still very relevant here. And then when you identify your passion areas, if you love designing, if you love the monitoring, if you love the data management aspects, once you identify that, you can now start targeting to go for these roles. And then you can set your career goals. It's not immediately that you're going to be the top clinical project manager. Sometimes it takes you a whole long time to walk through that, but you can say in the short term, I will become a CRC. So you can target being part of the site just for 1-2 years to really understand the scope of. Remember, I said that that's kind of like the real key of clinical research. And then you now said, okay, after being a CRC, I've been exposed to all the systems. I've been exposed to how it goes on the clinical trial, on the clinical research sites. Now I want to do CRA role, or I think I want to be a clinical trial manager. I think I want to go into the project management aspect, but you understand the core basics. So it's really, really great to set goals and being very realistic. You can also say my long-term goal. I've openly said this to my students that my long-term goal is I actually want to design trials. My students and everyone who works with me knows that that's kind of like what my long-term. So I started as a CRA, I've worked that, and I've worked now in clinical project management, clinical trial management. But my end goal is actually to be in the design. So you can set yourself different goals at different time points to be able to walk towards your full career goals. Next slide, please. So, what are the facilitators to enter clinical research? And I know that I have a lot of people, I think I've seen some of my students here on call. You can come in through certifications. Certifications, whilst the actual certificate, I wouldn't say is like the big deal, but the certifications or that time in that course really helps you get some entry into the industry, understanding what is really happening. So certifications like the Applied Clinical Research certificate, which Kathleen is going to talk a little bit more about later. They're very helpful. The Society of Clinical Research Associates, they just had a meeting in the past few weeks. The Association of Clinical Research Professionals. Having these certifications gives you like a rigor through clinical trials, albeit it's quite fast, but it kind of helps you, gain perspective of clinical research. And the advantage of being part of these groups is you start opening your world into the terminologies, the words that we use, the pathways, the places, the locations. You find out about clinicaltrial.gov. You find out that's the list, the most comprehensive list of all the clinical trials that are going on at any given point in time. So going into these spaces would help you. Networking, going on LinkedIn, type clinical research, clinical trials, try to find out people that are doing that, try to find out workshops, conferences that are going on, attending them, meeting people, having conversation. That kind of gives you like understanding of the terminologies and also ability or opportunity to put yourself out there to say, hey, this is kind of my interest right now, and this is what I'm going towards. Can we have a conversation about it? Are you willing to share your experience with me? Are you able to refer me? A lot of our companies, you get a referral fee for referring people. So don't be shy. Don't hold back from actually asking people to refer you. Every opportunity I have, somebody give me a chance, and you could be, someone could give you a chance as well. Volunteer. that is such a big one. Volunteering and internships. Go to clinicaltrial.gov, look at hospitals close to you. If there's a clinical trial going on, you can walk up to the site, say, hey, can I volunteer to help you with patient recruitment? Can I volunteer to shadow your clinical research coordinator? To be able to get a grasp into the roles. And of course, we talked about entry-level roles. Start where you are. Every step forward counts. It may not be the perfect role, but if you start where you are, you would definitely get there. Okay. Next slide, please.
Is mine. Thank you so much, Funleo. That was incredible. I'm going to be very brief. I'm going to speak about the program that Funleo teaches in, which is our Applied Clinical Research Certificate program. It's 5 courses. Typically, people take 1 course per term. So they're working full time, and then they're taking one of those courses, and you'll see that the structure is laid out before you. They are there's a couple of virtual sessions that are recorded. So if you're coming from if you're registering from a different country or a different time zone, you don't have to worry about that. There in the capstone project, there will be times that you'll need to work with your team as a team, because what we do is we emulate that row that transit map, if you will, subway map, tram, however you refer to it. We have roles in the clinical research capstone that students take on to do a real clinical research project that helps them talk about how they worked in a team-based environment when they're interviewing, what kind of skills they brought to, specifically what kind of skills they brought to the team. So I would encourage you to, if you are looking at, how do I break into clinical research? How do I move up in clinical research? We have a lot of students who come into the program who may be working for a very small outfit, and they want to get into the hospital per se. They want to get into a larger organization or pharmaceutical industry. They'll come into the program to get a broader scope. As well, we have other programs at McMaster University. When Funleo was talking about, being a data analyst or a data coordinator, we have a health informatics program that aligns perfectly to those skills for people who want to be a little bit more technical and bring those skills to the team. For people who have a clinical background but are interested in getting into project management more, we have a project management program that allows people to be prepared to write their project management certification with the PMP. And I will state that, as Funleo mentioned, in getting your certifications with SOCRA and ACRP, our curriculum for this program does align to both. So typically our students determine for themselves, do they want to get the ACRP designation? Do they want to get the designation from SOCRA? And that's kind of personal choice, depending on, which of those associations are more active in their communities. They really are aligned, and which ones are their employers looking for them to be involved in. Okay, thank you,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a great day. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks, Kathleen. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.